Are you confident that they will actually be able to stand trial, that they'll be found mentally competent, and that their harsh interrogation techniques like waterboarding, that they'll still be able to go to trial despite that?
I would not have authorized the bringing of these prosecutions unless I thought that in the outcome we would ultimately be successful. I will say that I have access to information that has not been publicly released that gives me great confidence that we will be successful in the prosecution of these cases in federal court.
Attorney General, can you say where you expect these military commissions to be held? And can you give some approximation of how many more Gitmo cases you expect to bring to civilian trial in the United States?
We have not made any determinations yet as to where the military commissions will actually take place, and we are in the process of reviewing other cases to decide whether they will be brought in federal court or in military commissions, and I expect that we'll be making additional announcements in the very near future.
Attorney General, some critics have already spoken out saying this is a very bad decision. Congressman Peter King's been quoted as saying this makes New York more of a target. How do you respond to that?
New York has a long history of trying these kinds of cases. The person who bombed the World Trade Centers back, I guess, in 1993 was tried there. The Blind Sheikh was tried there. New York has a hardened system. We have talked to the Marshal Service there. An analysis was done about the capabilities that exist in New York, and I'm quite confident that we can safely hold people there, that we can protect the people who surround the courthouse area and bring these cases successfully. So I don't think that that criticism is factually based.
At least one 9/11 family member has spoken up and said they're afraid that this trial in a civilian court will give the defendants a platform to spew their jihadi rhetoric and to ridicule the U.S. justice system. Are you at all concerned about giving them that opportunity, or do you think that won't happen?
Well, I'm confident that whatever judge is assigned to this case will maintain the dignity of the proceedings and make sure that the only thing that gets on the record is that which is relevant, and that is the focus on whether or not the focus it should be on guilt or innocence. So I'm confident as I am I'm confident with regard to that particular judge, whoever he or she might be, as I'm confident in all federal judges who have that capacity.
General, can you tell us if you can't assure, obviously, an outcome, you can't assure that these people will be convicted. What happens if they're not convicted? Will there be indefinite detention for those that are not convicted?
I would not have authorized the prosecution of these cases unless I was confident that our outcome would be a successful one.
General Holder, sorry, just to follow up on that, a lot of 9/11 family members, relatives of the victims, have said consistently, whether it's a military commission or this thing, or a civilian court, as my colleague pointed out, they're concerned that some judge could decide that somebody had done something wrong in the prosecution and spring these guys, or one of them, and that KSM could be wandering the streets of anywhere. How do you assure the family members that that's not going to happen, that these guys aren't going to be let go or exonerated somehow through a technicality and be set free?
I looked at the great work that was done by lawyers from the Department of Defense, the Office of Military Commissions, Department of Justice. I'm a prosecutor myself. I've looked at the evidence. I've considered the problems that these cases present, and I'm quite confident that we're going to be successful in the prosecution efforts. If I was concerned about the forum not leading to a positive result, or if I had a concern, a different concern, we would perhaps be in a different place. But the reality is, and I want to be as assuring as I can, that based on all of my experience and based on all of the recommendations and the great work and the research that has been done, that I am quite confident that the outcomes in these cases will be successful ones.
So if you're saying you're doing this to uphold the rule of law and for the fairness of justice, if you're picking different forums for different defendants based on where you can be sure that the outcome will be a conviction, and using military commissions on those where you're less sure, evidently, how is that fair? How is that the rule of law?
It's not a question of looking at outcome. It's a question of trying to decide exactly where a case is more appropriately brought. If one looks at what has happened in federal court. We have certainly done and have a great deal of experience with bringing terrorist cases. When it comes to cases that violate the wars of law, there's a greater experience, I think, with regard to military commissions. And so those are among the factors that we take into consideration. We're not looking for outcomes, trying to decide where we can get a better outcome in one case or the other. We look at a whole variety of factors that are contained, as I said, in that protocol that is publicly available, and make a case-by-case determination.
So just to follow, all 5 of the ones that are going to military commissions that were decided today, is that because those were military targets, like the Cole, and the 9/11 attacks were primarily civilian targets? Is that the defining characteristic?
Well, there are a variety of factors that go into it. Certainly with regard to the Cole bombing, that was an attack on a United States warship, and that, I think, is appropriately placed into the military commission setting. At least one of the others involves an attack on one of our soldiers. So that is among the factors that we considered in making determinations as to whether they go into civilian federal courts or the military commissions.
There's been some concern among victims and family members of people who perished in the 9/11 attacks that the 5 being sent to New York for civilian court would not be charged square on with 9/11 type offenses. In other words, material support or some lesser offense. Also wondering if you expect all 5 of those men to go on trial together or whether they would have separate trials.
Well, we are charging them with the most serious offenses that are appropriate, and we are, as I indicated, seeking the most serious punishment. As I said, I expect to ask for the death penalty when it comes to the prosecution of those 5 individuals. That is, I think, an indication of how serious I view these cases, how how negatively consequential their actions were, and how ultimately they must face the ultimate justice.
Attorney General Holder, coincidentally, the Canadian Supreme Court is hearing arguments about the transfer of Omar Khadr to Canada. The lawyer for Khadr suggested today that Khadr will be transferred to the United States to be tried. Will Khadr be transferred here for trial? And if the Canadian courts direct the government of Canada to request Khadr to be transferred to Canada, would you consider that request, or would the commission trials here trump that?
Well, we'll look at the Khadr matter. At this point, it is one of the cases designated for a commission proceeding, and we will, as that case proceeds, see how it should be ultimately treated.
Michael? Harsh interrogation techniques. Inevitably, defense lawyers are going to seek full disclosure about the circumstances of how these detainees were treated while they were in U.S. custody, and want to get as much of that before the jury as they can. What is the department's position going to be on whether the defense will be entitled to know the full story of how these detainees were treated while they were in U.S. custody?
Well, I think among the questions that have to be asked in that regard is relevance. How relevant were those statements? Will those statements be used? I don't know what the defense will try to do. It's hard for me to speculate at this point, so it's hard to know exactly what our response will be. But I'm quite confident on the basis of the evidence that we will be able to present, some of which, as I said, has not been even publicly discussed before, that we will be successful in our attempts to convict those men.
Will they be entitled to that evidence, entitled to know the full story of how they were treated?
Well, we'll see what motions they file, and we'll see what responses we make, and a judge will ultimately make that determination.
Can you walk us through Greg Craig's departure as White House counsel, and whether that was a surprise to you?
Yeah, it was a surprise. Greg Craig is a great lawyer. He has been a great friend to the Justice Department. We've had a good relationship with him. He has, I think, contributed in a significant way to the success of this administration, and I think to the success of the effort to close Guantanamo. Greg is a friend of mine, and those who have tried to place on him, I think, an unfair proportion of the blame as to why things have not proceeded perhaps as we have wanted with regard to Guantanamo. That's simply unfair. He is a great lawyer. He has been a great White House counsel. He was an early supporter of this president, and I know he leaves with the thanks of the president and certainly with my gratitude.